On October 6, 1995, tragedy struck at Charlotte Motor Speedway. It wasn't just another racing accident, it became one of the darkest days in NASCAR history.
The wreck took place during a sportsman race at the Speedway. As you can see, one of the cars, number 57, pinned against the wall at the Speedway. The roof of the car collapsed, killing the driver, 26-year-old Russell Phillips.
Russell Phillips, a 26-year-old driver who was beginning to turn heads in the racing world, was competing in the Winston 100. He was living his dream, doing what he loved most. But on lap 17, everything changed in an instant. A crash unfolded, and Russell's car slammed into the wall with devastating force. The scene was so terrifying that it sent shockwaves through the entire racing community. This accident didn't just break hearts, it raised serious questions about safety standards in the division. But how did this happen, and what exactly happened that day? This is the tragic story of Russell Lee Phillips. Russell Lee Phillips was born on March 6, 1969, in Mint Hill, North Carolina, a quiet little town just outside Charlotte. Now, if you know anything about that area, you'll know it's pure NASCAR country. Racing wasn't just a sport there, it was a way of life. For Russell, growing up surrounded by roaring engines and weekend races, it was impossible not to fall in love with it. After graduating from Independence High School in 1987, Russell joined his father's trucking company. He also tried his hand at preaching and even volunteered as a firefighter. But no matter what he did, racing was always calling his name. It was in his blood. Russell wasn't just a guy who liked cars. He was absolutely obsessed. He'd spend hours working on his own vehicles, perfecting every little detail. And when he wasn't behind the wheel, he was at a local racing school, helping young drivers sharpen their skills. But here's the thing about Russell. He wasn't just a racer. He was a genuinely good guy. Friends would often describe him as a gentle giant. He was a big, imposing figure, but he had one of the kindest hearts you'd ever find. He'd do anything for the people he cared about. In 1990, Russell finally took the leap and started racing seriously. He wasn't making much money from it, but it didn't matter. He was doing what he loved, and it was at one of those early races that he met his wife, Jennifer. He began competing on short tracks across the Carolinas, and let me tell you, he was good. That same year, he made the jump to the NASCAR Sportsman Division, a series designed for drivers trying to make a name for themselves. Most of his competitors had big money teams behind them, but not Russell. He was running his number 57 Chevrolet pretty much on his own. Still, he managed to secure sponsorships from local businesses like Mullis Well Drilling and Hendrick Office Machines. These partnerships kept him in the game, even if the media wasn't paying him much attention. Slowly but surely, he improved, race by race. By 1993, things started to click. Russell finished 8th in his division, a solid achievement. But 1995 was special. That year, Russell earned his first ever pole position at Charlotte Motor Speedway. He hit an incredible 157 miles per hour in qualifying, securing his spot at the very front of the starting grid. And the race was set for October 6, 1995, at the iconic Charlotte Motor Speedway. You see, this race wasn't one of those high-profile spotlight events. It was smaller, designed to give drivers a shot at gaining experience and pushing themselves against tougher competition. The lineup was always a mix, some veterans who'd been around the track more times than they could count, and others who were just getting their feet wet in the racing world. The setting? Charlotte Motor Speedway in Concord, North Carolina. This track isn't just a place where cars go fast, it's the place. It's the beating heart of NASCAR, a legendary stage that's been hosting incredible races since the 1960s. When the race kicked off, Russell Phillips shot out strong, leading for the first 2 laps. But racing can turn on a dime, and by lap 17, he had dropped back to around 10th place, stuck in a tight cluster of cars. And that's when everything unraveled. Lap 17 turned into chaos. 2 cars in front of Russell tangled, triggering a violent chain reaction. In the blink of an eye, another car clipped Russell's, sending him spinning, completely out of control. The nightmare peaked when his car hit the wall, roof first. The impact was catastrophic. The roof of Russell's car didn't just crumple, it collapsed entirely. It was one of those accidents where you immediately knew this wasn't survivable. The shock rippled through everyone at the track. Drivers like Curtis Markham couldn't hide their horror, describing the damage as absolutely devastating. People who had seen hundreds of crashes knew this was different. It was as bad as it gets. Eyewitnesses called it a worst-case scenario. Phillips's car had collided with a light fixture during the crash, and the force was indescribable. His body was left so badly mangled that it was, well, unrecognizable. The footage from that day still haunts people. In one clip, a first responder sprints to Phillips's car, but when he gets there, he just stops, frozen, stunned by the scene in front of him. The wreckage spoke louder than words. There was no helping Russell Phillips. The track was chaos, debris scattered everywhere, the metallic scent of fuel in the air, and a grim silence falling over the crowd. The race was immediately stopped, and rescue crews rushed to the wreckage, but it was already too late. Russell Phillips was gone. In an instant, the atmosphere shifted. The excitement, the energy, it all disappeared. Drivers, fans, officials, everyone was in disbelief. No one could process what had just happened. A freelance photographer named Tom Whitmore later described the roof of Phillips's car as if someone had taken a giant can opener to it, leaving it mangled and torn. He called it the most gruesome wreck he'd ever seen in his life. Rescue workers later found Russell's helmet lying at the entrance to pit road. That image alone said everything about the violence of the crash. They covered his body with a sheet and pulled out a massive tarp to block the view from the stands. White sheets were laid out to mark where body parts had been found across the track. It was a scene no one would ever forget. And yet, despite all of this, can you believe it? They restarted the race just 40 minutes later. NASCAR, of course, launched an investigation, working with track officials and safety experts to piece together what had gone wrong. The investigation revealed that Russell's car had struck the retaining wall at an incredibly severe angle and with unimaginable force. The impact was so violent that it tore the roof and roll cage clean off, leaving him with absolutely no protection, and that's ultimately what cost him his life. NASCAR officials didn't shy away from admitting the hard truth. The safety standards for the sportsman division simply weren't up to par with the bigger leagues, like the Winston Cup. After Russell Phillips's tragic crash, they promised a full investigation and vowed to make safety improvements. When investigators started digging into the details, they uncovered a serious issue. The safety regulations for the sportsman cars were incredibly lax. Teams often used older cars, and modifications weren't always done with safety as the top priority. In some cases, these adjustments actually made the cars more dangerous. According to a report from the Star-Gazette, investigators were specifically looking at whether Russell's roll bar had been welded incorrectly or if other structural changes had compromised the car's integrity. Experts worked closely with track officials to break down exactly what went wrong. The Edmonton Journal later reported that the speed, the angle of impact, and even the design of the wall all contributed to the severity of the crash. But the most heartbreaking finding was this: the roll cage and the roof of Russell's car completely failed to protect him. This tragedy was a turning point. NASCAR made a tough but necessary call. They stopped hosting sportsman races at Charlotte Motor Speedway starting in 1996 and implemented stricter safety measures across the board, including mandatory roof support bars. It was a wake-up call for everyone involved in the sport. Russell Phillips was only 26 years old. His widow, Jennifer, was left to carry the weight of an unimaginable loss. The racing community, his family, and his friends were all devastated. Russell was laid to rest at Sunset Memory Gardens in his hometown of Mint Hill, North Carolina. His funeral was packed. Family, friends, and members of the local community all came to say goodbye. May he rest in peace. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and hit the subscribe button for more content like this.